Tonight, NBC News is verifying some of what are basically the worst fears about the apparent motivation behind the gun massacre that happened this weekend in Allen, Texas. And there's so much that is disgusting and unsettling about these latest killings, including sort of what they connect to. You might remember it was a year ago this week that a gunman motivated by white supremacist, racist ideology went to Buffalo, went into a supermarket in a black neighborhood in Buffalo and killed 10 African Americans in that market. That was a year ago this week. That killer claimed he did that he massacred all those people in that supermarket. He said he did it because of the Great Replacement Theory, which you can hear all about on the Fox News channel. He said he did it because of the Great Replacement Theory and because of white genocide, which you can hear all about on right-wing talk radio. He killed 10 people and injured even more people than that. He got, in February this year, he was sentenced to 11 life sentences. That Buffalo attack, again, was a year ago this week. Also, the connection to Allen, Texas. Allen, Texas is where this latest massacre was this weekend. Allen, Texas is also where the shooter was living from the El Paso massacre. Allen, Texas is where the guy started his road trip to that Walmart in El Paso in 2019, where he shot and killed 23 people, almost all of whom were Latino. Again, the killer there ranting that he did it because of the Great Replacement Theory, popularized on the Fox News channel in primetime. Well, now today in Allen, Texas, we're learning more about the apparent motive in killing all these people this weekend. It is not a subtle thing. The gunman is believed to have recently posted this photo online. This picture and others like it appear to be him, appear to be pictures of himself from a couple of weeks ago. You see some of his nice, fresh tattoos there. NBC also reports that he had a long social media record online that included rants against Jews, against women, against racial minorities. NBC News also reporting that he posted a bunch of stuff online from white supremacist influencers, including the one who recently was apparently invited to Mar-a-Lago to dine with the former president at his South Florida home. There have also been reports that the gunman from Allen, Texas this weekend, he had a patch that was Velcroed onto the tactical vest he was wearing while he carried out the shooting, a patch that had the initials RWDS on it. Looks like this one. There's a patch of a similar kind shown on the tactical vest of the man who is the leader of the Proud Boys, pro-Trump right-wing paramilitary group. Until not that long ago, that Proud Boys leader had a merch store that sold this patch. RWDS stands for Right-Wing Death Squad. 4 leaders of the Proud Boys, the pro-Trump paramilitary group, were, of course, convicted of seditious conspiracy at the end of last week for their roles in the January 6th attack on Congress. One of those Proud Boys defendants who was just convicted of sedition, he had not just a patch of the right-wing death squad acronym, like the Allen, Texas shooter had, he actually had RWDS, right-wing death squad, tattooed on his arm, which you can see here. Today, also in federal court in Washington, D.C., we got a fairly heavy sentence handed down against yet another participant in the January 6th attack. He's 41 years old. He's a former petty officer first class in the U.S. Navy. Disturbingly, he reportedly carried top secret and compartmented information security clearances. He was already convicted and sentenced to 3 years in federal prison on charges related to him possessing illegal weapons, unregistered silencers. That was just a few months ago. Today, he got an additional 4 years on his sentence for his participation in the January 6th attack. And in the FBI affidavit that prosecutors submitted to the court in support of their case, that affidavit spells out his communications with FBI confidential informants, his coworkers, and others. Him spelling out and explaining to people why he was at the Capitol on January 6th with, he says, the Proud Boys. That affidavit also explains this man's very clear worldview for what exactly he was doing there that day, what he thought he was there to accomplish. This is from that FBI affidavit. Quote, Mr. Speed stormed the Capitol on January 6, 2021, to disrupt the peaceful transfer of power to President Biden, whom he believed rose to power through election fraud and was, quote, operated by the Jews. Mr. Speed was willing to act corruptly to achieve his goal and stop the certification, in part because he felt so passionately that he needed to defend himself and the United States against the country's Jews. He did not want the person he saw as a puppet of the Jews to take power. Mr. Speed also thought that more violence was needed on January 6 to pressure Congress to stop the certification, but that violence did not materialize because Jews had lulled Americans into support for nonviolence. Mr. Speed's deeply held anti-Semitism was a core part of his motive on January 6th. He told our undercover informant that he believed that America, a Christian country, was locked in a battle with the Jews. That's all this week. That's all at once. Of course, I didn't even mention, of course, all this is happening while we are in the middle of the trial of the white power, great replacement theory mass murderer from the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh. That trial's ongoing right now. And of course, all of these things have the same smell, right? They don't just happen to be connected in the news right now. They're connected. The Buffalo white supremacist mass murder, the El Paso white supremacist mass murder, the Pittsburgh synagogue white supremacist mass murder. Now it appears the Allen, Texas white supremacist mass murder. And in a nation recoiling and ashamed and disgusted, there's also these apparent connections, right, between this bleeding, ragged, right-wing mass violence and the bleeding, ragged, right-wing edge of politics. The most mainstream possible electoral Republican politics. The most mainstream, most successful right-wing media as well. But also this former president and his family and his former officials and the way he is currently running for president again. They're inviting literal, Hitler was right, outspoken anti-Semites, putting stars of David, Jewish stars on the heads of their enemies, telling people that's who we need to be going after, just the way Hitler. They're inviting people like that to their events with the highest ranking former officials of their government. And it's all happening while that former president is running for president again. And it's happening amid this unrelenting wave of white supremacist motivated mass murder. Are those two things separate? Are those two things just very disturbing parallel tracks that will never meet and that have never met? Or is one of these things an anchor for the other? Does the fact that both of these things are happening at once in our country, frankly, accelerate them both? Accelerate the racial radicalism and anti-Semitism as a political tool, and also just accelerate the violence in the streets? Do they work together, and if so, how? And if they do work together, how do we stop it? Joining us now is someone who has devoted her professional career to the study of just this problem. She is Kathleen Belew. She's Associate Professor of History at Northwestern University. She's author of the seminal book, Bring the War Home, The White Power Movement and Paramilitary America. Professor Belew, I really appreciate you making time to be back with us again tonight. Thank you. Thank you for having me. So you can probably tell from that right through, from that wind-up, that I am disturbed. I'm unnerved, at least, by these two parallel tracks, by what we see happening with incredible racial and anti-Semitic radicalism adjacent to very mainstream electoral politics and the kind of mass violence that we are seeing. As somebody who's an expert and studies these matters, should we see these things as parallel, or are they lines that intersect?
I don't think we can anymore say that this is adjacent. I think that at least the Republican Party, insofar as it is represented by Donald Trump, has fully embraced many of these elements. The fact that this kind of speech is not only sort of waved through with a wink and a nod, but invited in. And we can see that in the invitation of people like Nick Fuentes to dinner at Mar-a-Lago, the invitation of Holocaust denial into the main sort of welcome of the candidate. And the one that was the most concerning for me as someone who studies this kind of violence was the staging of and the content of the press conference announcing the kickoff of this campaign in Waco, Texas. Now, many people know about the Branch Davidian siege in Waco as part of sort of a general anti-government sensibility. But to people on the far right, to people in neo-Nazi groups, white power groups, militant right groups, it is a call directly to the chain of events that leads to the Oklahoma City bombing. A major act of mass casualty domestic terrorism. It is a direct call to that kind of violence. It's not just about speech. It's direct and bloody, and it has real tolls like we see in Allen and El Paso and Buffalo and Pittsburgh. And as more and more of these communities are impacted, that toll just grows and grows.